Hello. I'm just going to give some candid remarks and thoughts about the last book that I read. I'm going to try to just go off the top of my head and imagine that I'm just talking to my friend who just asked me, hey, what was the last book that you've read? And for me, it's Alexander Pushkin's Yevgeny Onegin, Eugene, Onegin. I don't know how to pronounce that correctly, but I think it's Yevgeny Onegin. This is, of course, a Russian, it's a poem. It's not like a traditional novel. Of course, there's difficulty in translating from Russian into English, especially when it involves verse, because was written in, I forgot, I think it's iambic tetrameter, so that means there's 4 beats per line, and it goes down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. So it kind of gives like this like sing-songy, like playful, I guess old school sound and rhythm, which was different for me because I don't normally read poems, but I heard about Pushkin and Yevgeny Onegin because I really like a lot of Russian books, and from what I've read, that this is basically like the progenitor, like the ancestor to all those Russian books. It kind of was the one that changed everything. Because from my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, but when this was written, there weren't really a lot of novels in the prosaic sense, kind of just like how you normally think of novels, like just regular writing. And this was sort of a step in that direction. And of course, the main character is going to be a very influential character for the rest of Russian literature, which of course I'll try and talk about or just touch on. Again, I'm not really a reviewer, I'm not really anything more than just an amateur hobbyist for reading, so I'm not going to have any crazy analytical information. I just imagine, like when I used to read books, or sometimes when I still read books, I just like to watch a video after of someone just talking about it. It doesn't have to be super crazy. And then sometimes I don't find videos, so it's just a very candid approach to talking about a book, almost as if I was in a book club, or like imagining just like a friend at work just asked me, hey, what was the last book you've read? And I go, oh, it's Yevgeny Onegin. It's Russian poem, written in like the 19th century. Pushkin was like an aristocratic guy. He comes from a lineage of like higher class aristocratic people, and part of his background is that I think it was his grandpa or great grandpa or something was an African guy who was captured and eventually became a well-renowned military man in Russia. And so that's kind of interesting. But he grew up, what's it called? He grew up in that time when Russia was getting more liberal, and he kind of imbibed on a lot of like English romantic writers such as Byron, and he was influenced by French Enlightenment type thinking, which was sort of seeping into Russia pretty hard at this time. A lot of Russians are speaking French, and they're sort of losing their orthodoxy and becoming more Jewish, so to speak. But yeah, so he does kind of fall into this more liberal category, but he's a good writer nevertheless, overall. Towards the end of his life, he was banished and sent into exile from Russia because they thought he was a little too liberal in his writings. And I don't know too much details about that. Other than that, wasn't necessarily like a super harsh banishment. It was more just a like a superficial banishment, sort of just like a slight I forgot the phrase, just like a little more like a warning than anything. But obviously it really did happen, and he was inspired to write on it when he was exiled. And I don't remember when he wrote this, but it said in the beginning of this introduction, which is pretty good, um, that he spent a lot of years writing Eugene or Yevgeny Onegin. He spent many years. He didn't finish it until he was like 30 or 31, or at least his early 30s. He spent a lot of time revising it and coming back to it. And so, again, just another cool fact. And unfortunately, Pushkin passed away early in his mid-30s. Again, another funny story. Well, it's kind of interesting, is that I think he was getting cucked or something by somebody. Or like, I don't know if it was his wife or his partner was being like approached by some other like military guy, and he was pretty offended, and so he challenged him to a duel, and unfortunately, Pushkin was the one who fell. So kind of sad. Dueling is kind of lame, but that was the thing in Russia at the time, or at least it was going away. But that also is dealt in the poem too. I'm just gonna call it a book or novel, because of course there's a story, and it's about like, I don't know, 150. Well, no, it's like 200 pages of poem, but of course it's in like a narrative style, like it follows a story. And yeah, so what is it about? Yevgeny Onegin, he's a fop, a dandy, a rake. He is an extravagant man. He lives a lavish lifestyle. He's comes from a well-to-do family. All he's known his whole life is living that cosmopolitan life of luxury, attending balls, eating rich foods, drinking, women. He's especially prone to women. That's one of his vices. But the older he's getting, actually, it's kind of confusing because there's a narrator. There's a narrator who isn't supposed to not be. Actually, I don't know. It's an unnamed narrator, so you don't know if it's Pushkin or if it's someone like Pushkin. But he's talking about Yevgeny Onegin, um, sort of from like a third-person perspective. But so the narrator is also the same. He's like a guy who's getting older, and he's also sort of getting wiser and realizing that he's been living a life that of ill morals, and he wants to do better. And this sort of same, and Yevgeny is also in the same fashion, where he's kind of grown older. He's actually gotten a little depressed. So there's this term that they use, the spleen. Spleen is like a literary term for like depression. It was used a lot in literary circles, and it's sort of more archaic. But Yevgeny is afflicted by the spleen, which is sort of this dull depression, this ennui in life, where nothing really interests him anymore. He's always searching for the next hit, the next dopamine fix, so to say. So he's kind of like the original, like, spleen's like brain rot depression back in the day. It was usually fixed by like traveling far, like taking baths, doing something to get your mind off it. But Yevgeny, it seems like no matter what he does, he can't escape that ennui, that sort of life boredom, that like dullness of all the things he used to enjoy. And at the beginning of the novel, right away, some of his family members pass away, and they give him this inheritance. So he gains like a large trust, he got like a big will, or a lot of money in a will. So he decides to go for Moscow, which I think was the capital then of Russia, and he goes to live in the countryside. So already it's like a typical Russian novel, right? And you could see this is very in line, or this is, well, rather on the opposite. It's kind of like V1. But of course, this novel did take inspiration from English, from like the Byronic hero, which is also very similar. Sort of like this like moody main character who's kind of grown sick of life and pleasures, and he has this disenchantment with most things, yet he still has like this flame inside it, this like yearning for something more. So this still takes, you know, in that same line of thought as the Byronic hero, which the Yevgeny admits to reading a lot. Like Yevgeny admits to reading a lot of like German philosophy. He reads like French. He reads French philosophy and French writers. He reads um, English romantic stories. So he's very much intertwined in that atmosphere, like liberal, artistic, sort of stepping away from tradition. Kind of a fire. Yevgeny is like a firebrand in that department of liberal thought, and he sort of sees the archaic like way of life as too old school or old fashioned. But yeah, he's grown disenchanted with life, and he goes to the countryside because now he's gotten a lot of money and land from his deceased uncle and father, I think. And he still finds that he's bored out there. You know, even though Pushkin does a great job of describing the beauties of the rural landscape, the provincial life is very flattering and pretty when it's written, but Yevgeny is just not into it. He finds it all the same. It's all dull. Um, and then the narrator does a good job too of just sort of being the contrast of Yevgeny. The narrator, whether or not it's Pushkin, just talks the way he talks about the countryside is just how beautiful it is, and what it does to a person's heart, especially as they get older. They sort of start to appreciate these things a bit more. Whereas when you were younger, all you could really think about were like women and whatever vices or lusts or passions occupied your heart then. So as you get older, you begin to appreciate these things, and um, but Yevgeny is, I don't know if he's in his early or mid-20s, but he doesn't really get that excitement from the countryside. But there he lives, and he meets, who does he meet? Lenski. He meets Lenski. Lenski is going to be another sort of main character. He's going to be this sort of not larger than life. He's sort of like a romantic artist. He's a he's a budding poet. He wants to be a great writer. He also loves like romance, love, and he's a very, I guess, yeah, larger than life. Like he lives like an artist. If you imagine an artist, like just his lifestyle, almost sort of bohemian and carefree, but with like these lofty aspirations of being a great writer and falling in love and etc. So in a way, he's sort of the opposite of Yevgeny, because Yevgeny has grown to be a bit dull, but Yevgeny Yevgeny and Lenski still manage to become friends, and it works out. It just works out, and just kind of how a lot of friendships end up working out. Like you wouldn't think that you'd get along with this person, but you do, and that's life. It's how it works sometimes. So they become friends, and Lenski, again, he's like a writer, and he falls in love with this provincial girl named Olga. Olga's kind of like a boring, no, maybe not boring, but just like a regular girl. Um, there's nothing too extravagant or fancy or super interesting about her. But he falls in love with her, and she has a younger sister named Tatiana. Tatiana um, is a bookish nerd. She loves reading. She's she's sort of enchanted by romance as well, and falls in love with Yevgeny. She falls in love with Yevgeny, ends up writing him this letter confessing her love to him, and like she's head over heels. She's physically sick. She's losing sleep over Yevgeny, and um, again she professes his love, and what else happens? Oh, Yevgeny and her end up meeting in nature one day. I think it was at a park or just outside. They meet, and Yevgeny spurns her. He rejects her, and this devastates her. Tatiana's pretty heartbroken, and Yevgeny was saying, in a way, like he kind of does like her a little bit. Like he finds a little bit of some of her charming, and just the way that she was so passionate about him. He finds it a little endearing, but he knows that he's not good for her. So he's sort of saying, like, I'm no good for you. I'm just gonna get bored of you. Like it's better that we don't pursue a relationship, which is pretty responsible actually, because Yevgeny probably would have hurt her if he were if he were more like when he was younger. He would have just pursued her with the intention of just disposing of her after he's gotten his fill. So in a way, that was pretty responsible of him. But of course, she was left devastated. And um, what else? The story moves rather quickly. I think a lot of what I like about Pushkin is that a lot of what he writes is just very pretty, and so a lot of it, at least to me, a lot of the chapters are more just like place set. They're like settings. They're like descriptions for the settings. So it's in a way like this. It's a very cozy book to read because it's not super narrative forward. Like of course there's a story, but most of it is just how pretty the writing is and how he describes emotions, how he talks about the characters. It's not so much that they come to life, it's just more so that they feel real, and there's a lot of little profound statements that Pushkin puts into his writing. And like even me, like I've like highlighted a lot of passages just because of I liked them, whether I just liked how they sounded, I liked what they talked about, or they were just very cool and interesting. So there's a lot of that in this book, which is really fun. It's fun to read. And so the story continues though. So Lenski, um, he's actually going to marry Olga, and Olga's having a party for her namesake, which was like a Russian traditional thing. I think it has to do with like your name. If you're named after a saint or a Christian person, and that day falls on their celebration, you have a feast. So Olga's having a feast, and Lenski invites Yevgeny, and of course Tatiana's going to be there. Tatiana, who's still pretty heartbroken, and Tatiana. Sorry, at this point I'm just giving a long summary, but I think it's kind of important, and it's just sometimes it's fun to hear someone else kind of give a summary sometimes. But yeah, they're at the namesake feast for Olga, and Yevgeny is just super depressed. Like he's really cynical. He kind of now he's like really grown old, grown sick and tired of the rural people, and they're sort of Pushkin gives like a caricature of a lot of the characters who you would find in rural settings. So it's just kind of it's a little comical. It's comical, honestly, when you're reading through the characters that you find in this party. Um, there's just like boorish people. There's like 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 fat people. There's like uncultured people. I don't remember all of them, but it's just really kind of funny, and you can just really picture the scene. But I do think Pushkin had like some animosity towards like traditions and maybe like the rural setting, or at least it seems like it. If not, it's just that's just what Yevgeny is thinking, or the narrator. But nevertheless, what else? They're at the party. Oh, Yevgeny's kind of butthurt. He's kind of upset that he's been invited. He doesn't like it at all. He's already over it. He wants to go home. He's like, please let me go home. Please, I'm sick of this. I just want to go home and play some Counter-Strike or something. And he, what's weird, this is one of like the weird things about Yevgeny and his bitterness and his cynicism, is that he's mad at Lenski for inviting him. So he just, I don't quite know why he did this, actually. Like, I don't know if it's just part of his bitter heart, but he decides to dance with Olga, as in I guess in a way to like get back at Lenski for inviting him, which is just strange. It's kind of evil. So, and for no reason, like Lenski never really did anything to him. Like, so it was a very strange and evil act by Yevgeny. And so he starts dancing with Olga, and Olga actually seems to like it. So she's kind of into it, and they dance twice, which everybody in the room was scandalized. They're like, "What the heck?" Like, Tatiana was distressed, but especially Lenski. Lenski's like, "What the heck? Like, I'm gonna marry this girl, and she's over here being a coquettish tramp." But yeah, because of that, Lenski is super infuriated, and he challenges Yevgeny to a duel. And dueling at this time, like the 19th century, was already dying down, but it was still active. And there were a lot of, the book doesn't talk about it. I had to do a little bit of research, but there's a lot of rules to dueling. It's not just two people like getting into a scrap. Like, there were a lot of formalities and things you're supposed to do to keep it proper and appropriate. And the way that their duel happened was sort of illegitimate. So again, Lenski challenges him to a duel, and Yevgeny just sort of like, yeah, whatever. You know, he's depressed. Like, yeah, okay, fine. Doesn't really care about anything. But Yevgeny, Lenski had his second. Second is like again, I'm gonna probably butcher it a little, but like a second in a duel is like kind of like your partner in a duel, and the second is supposed to sort of calm things down and offer forms of reconciliation before the duel occurs. So Lenski's second was supposed to offer Yevgeny a chance to say sorry and so they can amend, so they don't have to freaking fight and shoot each other and possibly die. But it doesn't happen, and this is another weird thing. I probably would have to do another reread because I didn't pay that much attention to this part. But apparently, Zarensky, which was Lenski's second, he he didn't really obey the rules of dueling, and he seemed kind of like he had bloodlust, like he was kind of instigating the duel. But it was very subtle, and like if you didn't know the rules of dueling, these things would have flown over your head, as they did for me. But yeah, that happened. And on top of that, oh no, in part of that, in addition, Yevgeny was late. He woke up late, you know, like classic him. Like, doesn't give a care. He doesn't give a hoot about conventions, formalities, and he didn't even want to shoot. Like he didn't even want to shoot at Lenski. Like he wasn't. He also didn't really have beef towards Lenski, which was just weird. He was just like, it's almost as if he does things just for, like how kids say nowadays, like rage baiting. Like he's just like a big troll, and even this, he wasn't really taking it seriously, and it's super sad and ironic because he didn't even want to shoot, or he didn't want to kill Lenski, and that's what he does. So Lenski dies because of the duel, which is really unfortunate because now this like young poet to be has perished at a young age before he was going to marry the love of his life, all because of some silly trivial issue. So it's a little sad because Lenski's he sort of he sort of gets this humble little tombstone with an inscription, and as Pushkin writes about it, or the narrator writes about it, like over time it gets just overgrown with grass, and sometimes people will visit it or they'll pass by it, but Lenski's a product of kind of like ego and this Russian cynicism that's been coming in strong waves, and he's a product of all that, and it's really unfortunate because he had a long life that he wanted to live. He wanted to be a great poet. He wanted to, of course, marry his Olga and presumably have a family, and just gone over what? Over nothing. So it's a little sad. And Yevgeny now, he's actually pretty remorseful about his actions, and he's remorseful about his actions, and in order to assuage his own soul, he decides to just keep traveling, because this is going to be a theme for Yevgeny, is like he doesn't feel comfortable in his own skin, in his own world, so he has to constantly keep traveling to experience new things, get new hits of dopamine. So he thinks that by leaving now the countryside, which he wanted to anyways, he thinks he'll get better. And while he's gone, it's really interesting that Tatiana ends up visiting like the house where he was staying at, which is kind of creepy a little bit, but it's cute in a strange way. But she visits his former house where he had all his books, and she was going flipping through the books that he was reading. He found he would highlight, and he would highlight certain passages that Tatiana found just really strange, but it sort of all started to make sense to Tatiana, like who Yevgeny was, because Yevgeny was basically an amalgamation of all the characters he's been reading about. So Yevgeny was sort of LARPing as every single character he was reading. He was grabbing bits and pieces that he liked, again from like the English romantics, from like French and German writers. He was taking in all this, and Tatiana just had that realization that Yevgeny is not really Yevgeny. He's just like a character, like he like he's lost in his life, and he bases his personality on the books and characters, and on the ideas that he reads. So it was really interesting to sort of get that perspective about Yevgeny, because Yevgeny would probably never admit that or say that. Um, yeah. So what happens after that? What does happen after that? Oh, well, life goes on. Unfortunately, Olga actually um, ends up marrying someone rather quickly. She marries a lancer, like a soldier. She gets over Lenski, which is also really unfortunate. It says a lot about certain characters. Um, but it's not like, I mean, what else could she have done? It's not like they were married, so it makes sense. But it's just part of life's follies is sometimes, you can meet someone, and how quickly you can get over them is sort of astonishing. Um, so Olga marries someone. Time goes on. Tatiana is still single, and her family wants her to get married soon. She's getting older, and they don't want her to keep sulking about Yevgeny. So her family, they save up some money and they decide to go to Moscow, Yevgeny's old stomping grounds, or I think, or St. Petersburg, one of those two, like cosmopolitan, you know, bigger cities, in order to meet a husband, in order to get a husband for Tatiana. And so Tatiana ends up marrying this older general, and it's sort of this starch contrast between how she was when she was younger. When she was younger, she had like these like very girly, like ambitions for love, you know, writing Yevgeny letters, professing her love, you know, this very like romanticized notion of falling in love. And now, well, not unfortunately, but now she's married to this older general, and they have sort of like this staid, mm, what kind of word? Like staid, like a serious relationship. She becomes more stately. She kind of matures a lot, and she changes from that girlish archetype to this sort of haughty, lofty woman who's now intertwined in this relationship with a wealthy, older general. And Yevgeny, is for some reason, sees her actually. So Yevgeny, since he was traveling, he actually ends up seeing this woman at a ball or a party, and he didn't know who it was, and he was enamored. He was like, who's this lady? Like she has such great bearing. Like he admired who this person was, and then it was Tatiana. She had literally changed so much that she was virtually indistinguishable from her former past. And so now Yevgeny's like, holy crud, like I love this girl, or like I really like her, like what the heck. And now he, ironically, is writing her letters, professing his love, you know, like, um, poetic justice, sort of like, yeah, he's professing his love to her, writing letters, doing what she once did with him. And unfortunately, she's not having it. She's matured now. She's married to that general, and she straight up just says to Yevgeny, like like I actually would want to do this. Like there's still a little bit of you in my heart, but I'm not gonna ruin my relationship, my marriage for for a small tryst, for a little dalliance. And so Yevgeny is now the heartbroken one, and that's just how the story ends. Yevgeny is ultimately heartbroken and lost, and he's gonna keep going from A to B to C, constantly looking for new things, never quite happy or resolute where he's at. And that's sort of, I think that's sort of just one of the themes about just the whole story is Yevgeny is sort of doomed in a sense, you know, due to his upbringing and the materials he read and studied. He's just kind of has such a darkened past that it's affecting him greatly, and you're not sure whether or not he'll ever become a normal person, or maybe he will. You know, nobody's actually doomed. You know, he has free will, but you can see the trajectory of just how he acts and where it's gonna get him. It seems it's gonna be almost like a never-ending cycle unless he one day breaks through, which, you know, Lord knows how he will do it. So that's kind of it. I mean, it's a good story. It's well written. It's beautiful. Um, I don't know what else to say, honestly. If you were my friend, I don't know what you would ask me. Did I learn anything? What did I learn from this story? Um, I'm not sure. I'd have to think about it more, which, you know, would be a great idea, right? For for a YouTube video. But off the top of my head, just touching back on like that growing cynicism in Russia, how it's affecting young men. They're sort of losing their bearings in life. You know, they go from vice to vice, never quite making it out of that vicious cycle. And there's not really there's not really a solution. Pushkin nor the narrator really offer a solution. It's just more so like a character study on this on on the main character. And I suppose a lot of people could relate. I think a lot of people do read this and have some, yeah, at least start to ruminate and be like, wait, there's kind of a little bit of me in there, or I used to be like that. Especially the older I get, I read this and it's funny because I don't know if it was the narrator was saying like he's in his early 30s and like he's sort of like he's over that. He's over his the vices from when he was younger, like his passions when he was a younger man. But it's crazy. The narrator, he says how it's crazy that like at the end of, oh, well, let me see if I could actually find it. If I can see it. I hope it's worth it. Ah, sorry if I butcher it. I'm not a good um, speaker, and I might mess up the rhythm because I'm just gonna read it off the book. So it's just one paragraph, and again, it's the narrator. He's talking about the context is within getting older, wiser, realizing your vices from the past, and sort of just ruminating and thinking about it in sort of in a wistful way. So he says, when we at last turn into sages and flock to tranquil wisdom's crest, when passion's flame no longer rages and all the yearnings in our breast, the wayward fits, the final surges, have all become mere comic urges, and pain has made us humble men. We sometimes like to this and then, as others tell of passion's swelling, they stir our hearts and fan the flame, just so a soldier old and lame, forgotten in his wretched dwelling, will strain to hear with bated breath the young blood's yarns of courting death. So even as you get older and you start to reject the ways of your younger self, there's sometimes still little sparks, you know, like in a way it's nice to reminisce and have those wistful thoughts. And so I really like what he says there because you know, like the soldier old and lame, like so you have a soldier who's old and disabled basically, and despite like he probably has no desire to return to war, right? But when he hears like the story of a young soldier, he's kind of like he gets excited again. He's like, oh man, like those were the days. So there's kind of like a very interesting like human nature, how you could grow up and start to despise or reject the bad things you used to do, like the ill morals that you used to do. Yet, you know, you hear someone talking about that stuff and you're kind of like, oh yeah, like that was kind of fun. Like, oh, like you get that little excitement, but you know, that's human nature, right? Human nature is pretty messed up. And I suppose that's another thing too. Like human nature is really weird, and um, you know, because of the fall of Adam, we just have that inclination for evil, and we see that in Yevgeny, who really, again, it's so weird. Like he had no real reason to kill Linsky or to hurt him the way he did at the party to dance with Olga. Like it was so just so weird. Like it's so evil. But you know, the older you get, you realize a lot of people sometimes just do evil stuff. You know, myself included. I'm not perfect. And it's just human nature is just so fascinating in that sense that you can just do something so dark for no reason that like you can find a joy in rage baiting or trolling someone to that level. It just seems very intense and unnecessary, but you know, we all do weird things from time to time. So, kind of crazy. Well, I guess that's all I really have to say. I don't know. Thinking about Tatiana is crazy too because it seems almost everyone's dreams in this in this book sort of got demolished. Like Yevgeny didn't find any respite from from the spleen. Like for his depression remains, and he it seems like he'll be that way for a long time. Tatiana, her sort of childhood, like her her like very like teeny bopper notions of love and romance ends up vanishing. Now she's like this like serious woman in like a serious marriage, and you know she left all that behind. Lenski, of course, has perished and fallen to his grave. Again, sad. His dreams demolished. Olga, I don't know. Olga's kind of like NPC or something. Like she's just gonna keep going in life. Like she's a very ordinary girl. Not to say that that's necessarily bad, but um, yeah, it's still kind of, at least from like when you read that, you don't romanticize that kind of life. Like nobody says, "Oh, I want to be an NPC," but I guess at the end of the day, sometimes you're just gonna crave that. I don't know. I don't know. But overall, I really liked it. I highly recommend it. At first read, it's a little difficult if you're not used to poetry and rhyme, but as you get used to it, you fall into the rhythm, and it's just a really delightful book with a lot of cool little profound verses. That's it. All right. Hope you enjoyed it. See you later.